Hi guys, it's Miss Phipps here, and this is the first online lesson that we're going to be doing on A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. In this first lesson, we're going to be looking at Dickens's introduction to Ebenezer Scrooge. So we're going to be thinking about how Dickens presents Scrooge to his reader, and also be thinking about what we learn about Scrooge right at the beginning of the novella and why Dickens presents him in this way. So we'll be thinking a little bit about context as well, and Dickens's intentions when he presents the character of Scrooge to his reader. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to read through an extract from Stave 1. So this is right at the beginning of the book. What you can do, you can either pause the video and read through this yourself, or you can just carry on playing the video and we will read through it together. It is really important that you read through this properly, like you would in an exam, before we move on and answer the questions and start thinking about it in a little bit more detail. So either pause the video now and read through, or keep going and we'll read through it together. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, Scrooge, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. Hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire, secret and self-contained and solitary as an oyster. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shrivelled his cheek, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red, his thin lips blue, and spoke out shrewdly in his grating voice. A frosty rime was on his head and on his eyebrows and his wiry chin. He carried his own low temperature about with him. He iced his office in the dog days and didn't thaw it 1 degree at Christmas. So when Dickens references the dog days here, he means the hottest days of the year. So we get an understanding of what Scrooge is like, his cold temperature, his cold personality, his cold appearance. And here Dickens is saying that even on the hottest days of the year, Scrooge iced his office because he wanted to keep that coldness around him. And even at Christmas time when it was cold, he didn't thaw it 1 degree at Christmas. So he didn't make it any hotter. He didn't warm it. So he always wants to be cold, just like his personality. External heat and cold had little influence on Scrooge. No warmth could warm, no wintry weather chill him. No wind that blew was bitterer than he. No falling snow was more intent upon its purpose. No pelting rain less open to entreaty. Foul weather didn't know where to have him. The heaviest rain and snow and hail and sleet could boast of the advantage over him in only one respect. They often came down handsomely, and Scrooge never did. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say with gladsome looks, "My dear Scrooge, how are you? When will you come to see me?" No beggars implored him to bestow a trifle. No children asked him what it was o'clock. No man or woman ever once in all his life inquired the way to such a place of Scrooge. Even the blind men's dogs appeared to know him, and when they saw him coming, would tug their owners into doorways and up courts, and then would wag their tails as though they said, "No eye at all is better than an evil eye, dark master." But what did Scrooge care? It was the very thing he liked, to edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance, was what the knowing ones call nuts to Scrooge. Okay, so the first thing I'd like, oh no, before that, sorry, just a couple of little references that I would like to go through. So the first one, he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone. If you don't know what a grindstone is, this is what a grindstone is. So blacksmiths would use it to kind of forge metal on and things like that. So that is what a grindstone is. So he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone. So this could be a reference to the way that Scrooge, works so hard for his money, or the way that he works others, the way that he works Bob Cratchit. For his money. Solitary as an oyster. This is what an oyster looks like. It is found at the bottom of the sea, and they often have pearls inside them. Don't know if oysters always have pearls, but very often they have pearls inside of them. And this is where you get pearls from. So this is what an oyster is. And flint, hard and sharp as flint. Flint is very hard, obviously it says that, and sharp. Rock, piece of rock. And that is what Dickens is comparing Scrooge to. So just 3 little picture references if you're not too sure what any of those things are. You do now. So initial ideas then, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to pause the video and I want you to answer these 3 initial questions about Scrooge and about the way that Dickens presents him to us at the beginning of the novella. So what do we learn about Scrooge from this extract? What intentions do you think Dickens had when presenting Scrooge to his reader? What did he want his reader to think about Scrooge? And why do you think Dickens presents Scrooge in this way? So pause the video now, literally like a sentence for each of these will be absolutely fine, and then we'll go through. Okay, so we learn about Scrooge then in Stave 1. We learn about his personality, his appearance, his behaviour. We learn that he's cold, miserly, selfish, and greedy. And he's acting as an embodiment here. Dickens is presenting him as an embodiment here of the wealthy capitalist in Victorian England. So we learn that Scrooge, he keeps his distance. He's very isolated. He's very solitary. He's a recluse, and he's miserly, meaning he hoards his money. He loves money and he keeps it. He doesn't spend it. He just keeps it. So what intentions do you think Dickens had when presenting Scrooge to his reader? Well, right at the beginning, he wants to position his reader against Scrooge. He wants his reader to see Scrooge as this outside to society, somebody that lives by his own he doesn't follow like societal norms. He has his own set of beliefs and his own attitudes that segregate him from the rest of society. So he's an outsider. We are positioned against him, and therefore we are critical of his behaviour. And this would be particularly relevant to Dickens's reader, because if we think about Victorian England, when A Christmas Carol first came out, there was an advertisement for it in the London Evening Standard, a newspaper, promoting the book. And if you think about who would be buying newspapers like that, well, it would be the wealthy. So the book was advertised, and the wealthy capitalists, the rich, would go out and buy it and read it. And if you think about the poor people, well, a lot of them wouldn't have been able to afford books in the first place. And a lot of the poor people couldn't read. So the book would have been read by a lot of capitalists, a lot of the rich, and Dickens, perhaps he was hoping that they would read this book, they would see Scrooge, and they would see some of their own behaviours and attitudes in Scrooge's character, reflected in Scrooge. So I guess this kind of links in with number 3. Like, why do you think Dickens presents Scrooge in this way? Well, he wanted his reader to critique Scrooge, and therefore maybe critique themselves as well, and see Scrooge as somebody, not to behave like. All right, so moving on, what we're going to do before we look at our exam style question, I've got some TDQs that I would like you to answer. Hopefully these are all things that you have covered in lessons already. The aim of this isn't to teach you something completely new, but to consolidate what you've already been learning in lessons. So I want you to work through these TDQs, try and do them in full sentences, maybe like a sentence or two for each, and then we'll go through these afterwards. So pause the video now, answer these questions, and then we'll go through the answers together. Okay, so number 1, within the metaphor tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, what does tight-fisted mean, and what does it suggest about Scrooge? Well, this is a reference to Scrooge's selfish, greedy nature. His fists are tight because he's got his money in his hands. It's a metaphor to show how greedy he is, how he hoards his money. He's miserly, and he doesn't willingly spend his money. He just keeps it. So he just wants more and more, emphasizing his greed. Covetous means to want what others have. How does this adjective, along with the noun phrase old sinner, help to position the reader against Scrooge? Consider context here and the role of religion in Victorian England. So if you think about religion, which played a huge role in Victorian England, the 10 Commandments, one of those is not to be covetous, not to want what other people have. So Scrooge is therefore sinning here. He is being covetous. He wants what other people have. He wants more and more, which would be seen as a sin. So if you think about people reading this book, they would therefore judge Scrooge on this. It would position them against him even more, and at the same time possibly get them to reflect on their own covetous behaviour. Dickens uses the simile solitary as an oyster. How could you interpret this to link to Scrooge as an outsider? Can you make any other references to what it could suggest? So this is a really good quote to think about multiple layers of interpretation. So an oyster, well, like Scrooge, is very solitary, very alone, very isolated. So therefore Scrooge is an outsider to society, just like an oyster being alone. An oyster has this hard outer shell, so perhaps that suggests that's a reference or comparison to Scrooge's hard outer exterior, his hard personality. He doesn't let anyone in, which we'll see later on when in the way that he treats other people. Possibly this pearl at the centre of the oyster could represent Scrooge's love for money being at his very core. His whole existence revolves around his love for money and his want of more money. But it could also be Dickens foreshadowing, perhaps, the possibility that there is some goodness within Scrooge. You know, like an oyster has this pearl inside of it. Perhaps Scrooge does have some kind of goodness inside of him, possibly being a reference to or foreshadowing Scrooge's later metamorphosis, his change. Pathetic fallacy within the second paragraph. Well, there's lots, if we go back to the extract, there's lots of examples of the way Dickens makes use of or reference to weather to describe Scrooge, and all of this here. So the way that a frosty rime on his head, how he iced his office, didn't thaw at 1 degree. External heat and cold had little influence on Scrooge, so he's not influenced by the weather at all because he is so cold already. No warm could warm, no wintry weather chill him. No wind that blew was bitterer than he. So all of these are references to Scrooge's cold, bitter personality. Nothing can warm him. He is so cold. Number 5, no eye at all is better than an evil eye dark master. What do you think this means? What does this suggest about how others perceive Scrooge? Well, the dogs of the blind men, that is who apparently says this, no eye at all is better than an evil eye dark master. And what it is saying is that it's better to be blind, better to not be able to see at all than see the world in the way that Scrooge sees it. You know, he sees the world in this negative, pessimistic, critical way. And these dogs are saying to their owners, it's better to be blind. You'd rather be blind than have this negative perception of the world around you. And through Scrooge, what message do you think Dickens was trying to convey to his reader at the time? Well, like I've said, Dickens was trying to show his reader how not to live. You know, do not be like Scrooge. Do not be miserly. Do not be greedy. Do not be selfish. Do not be so critical. Do not be so reclusive and solitary and isolated. All right, so hopefully you found those helpful. What we're going to do, this is our exam style question today, starting with this extract. How does Dickens present Scrooge to the reader? So I'm going to give you a couple of quotes, 2 quotes. We'll do them one at a time. Write the quote down, and I want you to make some annotations around this quote based on, this one actually is different to the questions from earlier, but hopefully you can, like you were doing in an exam, annotate it and pick it apart a little bit, and then the next one you'll be able to use some of the references to the TDQs before. So write it down, make a few annotations. What are you going to say about it? What methods are you going to pick out of it? Well, I've underlined some that you could be using. And then I will show you the sort of things that I would say about this quote. So pause it now, do that, and then unpause the video to see what I have said about it. Okay, so the first thing I do is I pick out the verb edge, and it's illustrating how Scrooge segregates himself from the rest of society. So whilst the rest of society are, you know, crowding on the paths and enjoying life and being compassionate and friendly, Scrooge is there on the edge. He's an outsider, he's isolated, and he's alone. And this links in with these crowded paths. Dickens is juxtaposing, you know, the rest of society all crowded together with Scrooge isolated and alone from the rest of humanity. The fact that he keeps all human sympathy, so the determinate all, emphasises again his isolation as he rejects anyone who comes near him, which we will see later on. And keeping its distance, well, this illustrates again how separated he is from those around him. And also could be a reference to the distance between his current attitude and the attitude that he should have towards mankind, particularly the poor, which again we will see later on. All right, so we're going to do another quote. Here you go. Hard and sharp as flint, secret, self-contained, solitary as an oyster. So again, make some annotations around this quote, write it down, pause the video, and then we'll see if what you said about it lines up, matches up to what I have said about it. Okay, so the first thing I do is I talk about these adjectives, hard, sharp, self-contained, and they illustrate Scrooge's cold and unpleasant nature. could also be alluding to the harmful impact that his behaviour and attitude has on others. So the idea of flint being sharp, well, perhaps Scrooge's actions, if something is sharp, it's harmful. Perhaps Scrooge's actions are harmful, and we will see later on how Scrooge's actions are harmful, particularly to the Cratchit family. And the simile, solitary as an oyster, or much like an oyster, Scrooge lives an isolated existence. The shell could represent his hard outer layer, and the pearl his love for money at the centre of his being. However, it could represent the possible good inside of him. And like I said earlier, Dickens foreshadowing that goodness that could be inside of him. He just needs to be shown the way. All right, so what I would like you to do is I want you to answer this question. Starting with this extract, how does Dickens present Scrooge to the reader? I have done my model on one of these quotes. I think I've done my model on, I don't think, I know, I've done my model on this quote here. So I want you to do a similar answer. You can, magpie some of my ideas, but ultimately you're going to be using a different quote and you're going to be picking out different methods. So you can either pause the video and give that a go without seeing my model and then read my model afterwards, or you can read through my model first, which is here, and then answer the question. I'm not going to read through it myself. I'll let you do that. But I'm following this success criteria here, conceptualized approach, or my main concept is that Scrooge is isolated and reclusive. And the way that this positions us against him, we're critical of him behaving in that way. I've got my embedded quotations, so I've used the one edges his way along the crowded paths of life. And I've also used a bit about how he warns all human sympathy to keep its distance. My mouse has stopped working, so there we go. Warns all human sympathy to keep its distance. And analysis of methods, so picking out those particular methods used by Dickens. So I've spoken about the verb edge. I haven't colour coded it here, but how he juxtaposes the crowded paths of life with Scrooge on the edge there. Represented later on by the Cratchit family, I suppose that's a method as well. Layers of meaning, well, especially particularly with that simile quote, there's loads of different things you could say about it, so try using your connectives like moreover, additionally. Why can't I think of any more connectives? Some more. And lastly, Dickens's intentions. Why Dickens presents Scrooge in this way. So I've said this could have been Dickens making reference to the class divide within Victorian England. So using what you know about context as well. Okay, so like I said, either read my model or pause the video, go back, don't read my model and then compare yours to mine. But hopefully this has been helpful and has consolidated what you already know about A Christmas Carol. All right, thanks everyone so much for watching and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.